State University. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the first lecture of the Fluid lecture series. Fluid is Finding Leadership Under Identity. This is our first LGBTQIA lecture. It's a public lecture series that brings together not only members of the LGBT community, but also all of our allies around campus, students, faculty, staff, alumni, great community leaders, as well as friends and family. We're very excited because the purpose of this series is to continue a scholarly dialogue that might take place inside of the classroom. But it's also about building community.
I wanted to first take a moment to thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight. I'm really excited about this series, but I'm especially thrilled tonight to introduce the two speakers that we have this evening. They're both very passionate about the topic. They have an abundance of knowledge on the subject, and I'm really honored that they're here to speak tonight. Kristen Kovanoff is one of the founding members and the current executive director of the Military Acceptance Project, which is an organization devoted to achieving broader acceptance for all service members, both former, current, and future. She's a former Marine Corps captain who served in the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing and was deployed in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. She is currently finishing her master's degree in social work at the University of Southern California with an emphasis in military social work. We also have Captain Mathew Phelps. He enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in 2002 after the events of September 11th. He achieved the rank of sergeant before commissioning in 2005. Captain Phelps deployed to Iraq in 2007 in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom, and is right now, it currently serves as a company commander at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego, California. So without further ado, I'd like to give a warm welcome to both Kristen and Matt.
At the Military Acceptance Project, we found that once people understand the personal story behind Don't Ask, Don't Tell, that's when the light bulb comes on for them. And I want to try to do something here to help you feel that personal connection and understand a little bit more what it might have been like to serve under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, take a deep breath, and try to relax. Now I want you to think about your dream job. I want you to think about the job that you've been training for all of your life. The one that you feel like you're contributing every day when you go to work. Can you see that? How's that make you feel? Maybe productive, successful. Now I want you to think about the person that you love the most in this world. That might be a spouse, might be a partner, might be a family member. This is the person that you share everything with. The person that's proud of you. The person that loves you. How does it feel to know that you have someone like that in your life that's so supportive? Maybe confident, grateful, loved. Now I want you to imagine what it would be like if you went to work and you could never talk about that person. Can you imagine that? Can't talk about your home together. Can't talk about your vacations together. If you're lucky enough to be married, you can't talk about your wedding. You can't talk about your children. In the eyes of your company, your relationship does not exist. How does that feel? Lonely? Unjust? Stressful? Now I want you to imagine that your boss comes to you and asks you to open a new office overseas. It's an amazing career opportunity, one that you've been waiting for your entire life. But there's one catch. Your loved one can't come with you. You can't talk to that person on the phone once you're gone. Every email you send back and forth is going to be read and screened. And there's also a civil war going on in the country that you're going to be moving to. So every day your life's going to be threatened. You decide to take the job. Your loved one's not allowed to go to the airport with you on your last day in the United States. You have to say goodbye to your loved one, the person you love the most in your life, in your car, because you can't be seen with that person in the airport. How does that feel, to have to say goodbye in a car? So you walk into the airport, you see your coworkers, everybody's with their family, they're saying goodbye, hugs, kisses. Then your boss pulls you aside and says, "Aren't you glad you don't have to go through that?" That's what it's like serving under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. These things don't exist to you, and they don't exist to anyone else. You want to take another deep breath? Open your eyes. That's what we're talking about. Do you guys feel that emotion of how stressful it can be to not have family, to not talk about the people that are important to you? It can weigh on you. So prior to Don't Ask, Don't Tell's implementation in 1993, being homosexual in the military is illegal. So that essentially means you can't serve. And if you're found to be homosexual, they can hunt you down. Maybe you've heard of the witch hunts of the 1980s. They can hunt you down and kick you out for no reason other than you're suspected to be homosexual. So Bill Clinton in 1993 made a compromise. The compromise was Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And essentially that meant that you can be gay and serve, you just can't talk about it, and I can't ask you about it. Which for a lot of people, that makes sense. Okay, I won't talk about it if you don't ask about it. But what it means in reality is that people were living double lives. So you have your work life where you go to work and you're a professional and you're a leader and you're leading Marines and you have integrity and you're making decisions. But you can't talk about your weekend. You can't talk about your vacation. And that partner doesn't exist. So here you are actually lying and going against your integrity just to work the system and serve under this policy. So there was a big integrity issue for a lot of people that were serving at that time. Sorry, this is kind of turned off. So, so what does that mean after Don't Ask, Don't Tell? So for 17 years, that's how people were expected to serve. So for 17 years, we've all fought and tried to get equality for gay and lesbian service members. And that came in the form of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was signed into law in 2010, but then was enacted a year later on September 20th, 2011. So what does the repeal mean? That means that all that goes away, right? No, it's a little more complex than that. The repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell essentially means that gay, lesbian, and bisexual service members can now serve openly in the military without being questioned about their sexuality, without the fear of getting kicked out. So you'll notice I said lesbian, gay, and bisexual. I said nothing about our transgender brothers and sisters. Based on medical policy, which includes physical health and mental health, transgender individuals are still not allowed to serve, even after the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. There were some benefits that were awarded to gay and lesbian service members, but not full benefits. Essentially, any benefit that can be given to an individual. So let's say your life insurance benefit. You can sign anybody's name for your life insurance benefits. That's available to gay and lesbian service members. Any benefit that has to be designated to a spouse, because of the Defense of Marriage Act, those benefits cannot be given to those service member spouses. So that affects pay, that affects health insurance, that affects relocation benefits. And so you can see that even though things have gotten a little bit better, there's still a ways to go. Despite the repeal happening in September, there's still people that choose not to come out. There are still people that hide their sexual orientation. Why is that? You can't erase 17 years, the existence of the military. You can't erase that feeling with the stroke of a pen and a law going away. If you think about it, the military was integrated, African Americans were integrated into the military in 1942. But there are still issues for African American service members. Women were integrated into the military in the 70s. There's still a lot of issues about women serving in the military. And I think we can't expect for gay and lesbian service members to just change overnight and military culture change overnight. If you think about the military as a culture, what are the things that come to mind? Hypermasculinity, maybe? It's a male-dominated environment. So we think about aggression. We think about strength. Those are the things that are valued in a hypermasculine environment. We think about heteronormativity, because that's what we live. We assume that everyone sitting next to us is straight, because until a couple months ago, it was illegal for someone to be gay and serve. So we're dealing with that. We're dealing with all of the other isms, the sexism and the racism and all of the other isms, all in one environment where we're supposed to be working together as a team to accomplish a mission. So it's understandable that people don't come out in that kind of environment. But at the Military Acceptance Project, that's what we're trying to change. We're not trying to change people's beliefs. We're trying to change the environment to best fit those service members. And cultural change is not easy. But it starts with discussions, and it starts with role models. People that are willing to stand up and say, wait a minute, I am gay, and I am a leader, and I am able to do these things. And right now, there aren't a lot of people that are willing to step up and have these discussions and put themselves out there for fear of their career. And so I just want to read a quote from Hillary Clinton from Human Rights Day last year. She said, "Progress starts with honest discussion. Reaching understanding of these issues takes more than speech. It takes a conversation. In fact, it takes a constellation of conversations in places big and small. And it takes a willingness to seek stark differences in belief as a reason to begin the conversation, not avoid it." That's what we're doing today. And that's what we do at the Military Acceptance Project. We have these hard conversations where we have people lay their political correctness on the table, and we talk about the reasons why we're different, come to an understanding of those differences, and learn how to work together. To continue the discussion, Matthew's going to come up and give you the personal background about what it was like to serve under Don't Ask, Don't Tell and to serve post-repeal, and talk about some of the things that we need to do.
My name is Mathew Phelps. I am a captain in the Marine Corps. I grew up in a small town near Chicago, Illinois, fairly conservative, without really knowing that they were conservative. So for me, growing up, I guess I sort of realized that there was something different about me, but until I was 15, 16 years old, I didn't have a language yet to understand what that was. The town where I grew up gay didn't really exist. So it was not something that I struggled with until I got to about high school. So when I was 18 years old, I was getting ready to go to college, and I felt like it was time for me to sort of come out to my parents and make sure that they understood who I was before I left home. And it was a perfect opportunity for me to do it, because if they didn't like it, it didn't matter, because I wasn't going to live there anymore. So my parents kind of struggled with it a little bit. I went off to college. I had a great time sort of getting to know myself and trying to make up for time lost as a kid. After I graduated from college, I moved to Orlando, Florida, and I worked down there for 3 years. And then on September 11th of 2001, I woke up to turn on the TV. It was my day off, so I was just lying in bed looking for Jenny Jones or something, and if anybody even remembers that show. That's what you do on Tuesday mornings on your day off. So unfortunately, there was this horrible movie playing out on TV of these airliners crashing into buildings in New York City, and that movie was playing on every channel. And as I came to the realization of the horror that was happening, I also came to realize that what I had been doing with my life so far was relatively meaningless. So I knew that I needed to change. I knew that I needed to find something else to do. And I couldn't think of anything else that I could do other than to serve my country. So I started talking to a Marine Corps recruiter. The idea was the Marines, being the Marines, were the ones that were going to go take care of this problem that we seemed to have. So I started talking to the recruiter, and as things were sort of going, I was thinking in the back of my head, I think there was a policy that came into play about 10 years ago, because this was 2002, so 10 years prior, there had been this Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. So I started doing some research on what Don't Ask, Don't Tell meant. And the policy, as Kristen explained, was very simple. Nobody's going to ask you about your sexuality, and you're not going to tell anybody about your sexuality. At the time, I was under the impression that my sexuality was something that was defined by what happened in my bedroom. And I thought, well, this is easy enough, because who wants to talk about their sex life when they're at work? This is not anything that's ever going to come up, so it made perfect sense to me. So I said, that's a deal that I can keep. That's a promise that I can make, especially when it means that I can serve my country. So it was time for me to finally enlist in the Marine Corps. And so you go to the recruiter's office and you sit down and you have to sign through all these paperwork, like 50 pages of signatures required that you understand this and you understand this. And when they say you sign your life away, you do it about 50 times, 50 different sheets of paper, just to make sure that you get the point. And so one of the pieces of paper that I had to sign was the Department of Defense policy on homosexuality. And it was a page-long thing. My father was a lawyer, and so he always taught me never sign anything that you haven't read. Never put your name on something that you don't understand. So I'm sitting there just signing through all these pieces of paper, and then finally this one comes to me, and I say, okay, well this one I really ought to read before I sign it. So I'm taking my time reading the thing, and the recruiter's looking at me, and he's frustrated because we've got another 25 pages to go through before I'm enlisted, and he said, what's the problem? I said, well, I'm just reading this thing. And he says, well, basically, are you gay? I've just finished reading this thing. He's not allowed to ask me that. And in fact, it says at the bottom, has anybody asked you about your sexuality? And I look at him and I go, well, barring your last question, no, nobody's asked me. And he said, okay, well, then just sign the thing and move on. So that was my first experience, and it should have taught me that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was going to be a hell of a lot more complicated than I thought it was going to be. But I was driven, and I was going to do what I was going to do. So I enlisted in the Marine Corps. And so at this point, it's important for me to tell you that as a Marine, actively serving, I am not speaking on behalf of the Marine Corps. I do not speak in policy. I'm not here in uniform, so anybody who's paying attention to the Articles of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, let me be very clear that I am speaking from my own personal experience. The sad thing is that I have to tell you that before I talk to you about what it's like to be gay in the military. The fact that what I'm telling you about could be so highly politicized that it could be interpreted as political speech, that it could cost me my job if it appeared that I was speaking on behalf of the military. The fact that I have to tell you that is disturbing. But things are changing. So let me tell you a little bit about what it was like to serve under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. You live in a constant fear of people finding out about you. And they can find out about you in any number of different ways. My recruiter asked me. So the Marine Corps could have found out that way. If I had decided to tell him, yes, I am, that would have been it. That would have been the end of the line for me. When I got to my first duty station, I made some friends, and as I got closer to them and I felt like I could trust them, a select few, I told them that I was gay. Going out on a limb, knowing that I could get in a lot of trouble, but sometimes you just know people, right? Well, at one point, I had an argument with one of the females that I had told in my unit, and she decided she was going to go into the commanding officer's, or my officer in charge's office and tell him that I was gay. His response, thankfully, at that point was, he's a good Marine, that doesn't matter to me, just leave it alone. Fine. A couple years later, I'm getting ready to I'm going on a trip. The unit that I was with, we did a lot of traveling. So I'm in, I don't know, somewhere in the Midwest. And on this trip, see, what would happen when we would go on these trips is we would get liberty in these cities. So, hey, great, it's a new city, let me go out on liberty and do something. This particular night, I went to a bar. Had to go by myself because I wasn't about to take anybody else out to a gay bar. So I went by myself, which anyone will tell you in a strange city is probably a bad move. It did turn out to be a bad move. When I woke up the next morning, I was dazed and confused on the side of the road. Apparently, I had been left there after being assaulted the night before. It was clear that it had been a sexual assault. And as things came back to me, I realized that it was only when I began to come to and fight off my attackers that they had decided that maybe now is not the best time to be messing with a Marine. However, in the state that I had been the night before, drunk and whatever Marines do on liberty, the tables had turned and they had left me on the side of the road. Of course, we were in a different town, so I made my way back to where we were supposed to be. And I checked in with the people who, the staff that I worked for, who of course were looking for me and of course were very worried about me. And I told them, I got drunk, I slept in, I'm sorry, I'm here now. Fast forward a couple years later. A friend of mine, back in that first unit that I had, comes under investigation. Somebody found out about him and his boyfriend. So the military police, in the course of the investigation, ask him, who else do you know that is gay? And he starts naming names, because that's what you do. When the military police, when CID asks you questions, you answer the questions. So my name came up. At this time, I was going through officer training in Quantico, Virginia. And I get a call from someone in the unit who's got the heads up that my name has been brought up in an investigation. So I called my attorneys and they said, well, let us know if anything comes of it. And thankfully, nothing did. So over the course of my career, I started to understand what Don't Ask, Don't Tell was. And I started to understand what it was doing to me. And so I started to find ways to do what I could to start working against this policy. Obviously, I gave you my disclaimer before. And of course, I was on active duty in the military, and there was only so much that I could do or say. But I did start talking to people and start figuring out what it was that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was doing, and I started talking to people about my experiences, always anonymously, always using pen names or whatever the case may be. And I started learning more about this policy, and I started examining for myself, what it was that it was doing, what it was that it was doing to me. And what I learned was how to live under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I set up some rules for myself. Don't talk about yourself at work. Don't talk about your family and friends. Don't talk about any of your family and friends. Because you never know where that conversation is going to go. That rule, incidentally, also applies to your family and friends. Don't talk about your Marine. Don't talk about your service member. My parents, for 10 years, never told anybody that I was gay, even out of the context of the military, because they were afraid that somebody might find out. Somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody in the Marine Corps would know who I was, and that would be the end of my career. I had a boyfriend for a few years, and he felt the same thing. He never told any of his coworkers what I did. So it wasn't something that just affected me. It was something that affected everybody that I lived with, that I talked to, that I loved. Because they were under their own version of don't ask, don't tell. So you don't talk about your family and friends. You don't talk about what you did on the weekend. You don't talk about what you want to do with your life. You don't ever talk about anything personal. That's a horrible way to go through life. And the stress that it had on me ruined every relationship that I was in. Because, as Kristen said, when she was talking about deploying, I went through exactly the same thing. My family came to see me off before I went to Iraq. And I hugged and kissed my mom, and I hugged and kissed my dad, and I hugged and kissed my sister, and I shook my boyfriend's hand, and I said, I'll see you when I see you. Not having any idea if I was ever going to come back. And at the end of that deployment, when everybody else is going through all these classes about this is how you reincorporate yourself back into your family. I mean, that's a huge traumatic experience going through a war, by the way. So they have all these classes. They say this is how you deal with your spouse. This is how you deal with your family. This is how you adjust to being back in the States again. And every time I heard one of these stupid lectures, I thought, this doesn't apply to me. They don't even know that I'm going home to anybody. And while the spouses at home are getting those same classes, here's how to incorporate your Marine back into the family. My boyfriend wasn't getting anything. Nobody even knew that he existed. Much less are they sitting there talking to him, telling him how to accept me back into the family. How to deal with me when I get back home. So I got home. I had no idea how to relate the experience that I had to him. He had no idea how to relate to me after having been through that experience. And it was really just a matter of time before it fell apart. But then things started to pick up speed on this repeal stuff. And I started to get my hopes up. And I started to realize that this policy could actually end. We could actually be looking at the end of this thing. And so, as it started to pick up speed, I started to continue working on what I could do. And I started to get a little bit more involved. That's how I got to meet Kristen. That's how I got to meet some really great people who were getting involved with the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. But I was still somewhat restricted on what I could do. We get all the way to September 20th, the day that this law changes. And I walked into my office, nervous as hell. I've been through a war, but on this day that I went into work, I was bracing myself for the impact of people coming and finally asking me. Because of course they've been wanting to ask me for all these years, right? And now is their chance that they're going to ask me. And I've been spending the past few years hearing people just rail against every possible reason why we should get rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I'm right in the thick of all these people who have been talking about queers and fags and how they don't belong in the military, just sitting there silently while they're talking about this stuff, while they're having no idea that they're looking a queer fag right in the eye while they're saying it. I'm waiting for them. I'm waiting for them to come into my office and finally just let me have it. And I sat there in my office alone all day. The phone didn't even ring. Nobody came into the office. Surprisingly, the building was still standing. The military did not fall apart. The Marine Corps, the ones who are the most vocal against repealing the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, the Marines still came to work that day. The Marines were still professional. And I felt confident enough that I went to my commanding officer and I said, "Sir, let me give you some background. Every year on November 10th, the Marine Corps celebrates his birthday. We're very big on ceremonies. We love getting dressed up. We love having a party. We love any excuse to drink, and we do it at work quite often." So November 10th is coming up, and it's going to be the birthday. And so every year on the Marine Corps birthday, every unit in the Marine Corps has this big party. And it's the birthday ball. And every Marine in the unit puts on their best uniform. They bring their date in their best dress. Or the female Marines, they bring their very easily intimidated boyfriends. But they show, everybody comes and they have this big party. So for every year prior, I had never taken a date to any of these things. Because it had always, I'm not going to take a girl because she's going to be expecting me to put out at the end of the night, and that's just not going to happen. I'm just kidding. So it was a matter of integrity. I wasn't going to take somebody and introduce them as my date when it wasn't my date. So I told my commanding officer, I said, "Sir, you need to know this policy is over, and I'm bringing a date this year." His name is Brandon. He lives in Indianapolis. He's gonna fly out, and we're gonna go to the ball together. He said, "Okay." And that's when I knew that everything was gonna be fine. I'm a company commander in recruit training at MCRD. 18,000 young men walk through the halls of the office where I work every year on their way to becoming Marines. I have 35 to 40 Marines that work directly for me, that report to me. I had just walked in a month after the repeal of the 17-year-old policy to my boss's office, and I said, "This is what's happening." He said, "Okay, we'll see you there." And on that night, when Brandon and I walked into the ballroom, I got sweaty palms. I was nervous. I wasn't even holding his hand or anything. In fact, it was like quite the opposite. It was like, "Stay away from me," because if they figure it out, that's one thing, but they certainly don't need to see it. So we were nervous, and here's 1,800 Marines and their dates. Of course, I had the best looking date. You can't blame it. I mean, he had the little scruff going on. He had, the smart black suit, black tie. It was nice. But the best part of the evening, I walked up to my regimental commander. So I'm a company commander, and then you have the battalion, and then you have the regiment. So my regimental commander is a full-bird colonel. And, he's much taller than I am. He's very commanding looking. And so we walk up to him, and I said, "Sir, I want you to meet Brandon." And he introduces himself. And he looks at Brandon and he says, "So is this your first one?" And Brandon and I just sort of looked at him. "Yeah." And the way the colonel looked at us, the way we kind of looked back at him, it was kind of, he realized that he was asking the gay date of the gay Marine if they had ever been gay at a ball together for 10 or 11 months. So these are all people who have decided to join since the repeal bill was passed in the House. There's been no noticeable dip in numbers of people coming in, and as far as people leaving, I haven't heard anything, even anecdotally, about people who are leaving specifically because of the policy. People were discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell a lot of different ways, and you may be more knowledgeable about this than I am. Some of them were just violation of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which meant that it was an administrative separation. But if there were any circumstances that were tied to that, whether someone was discovered to be in a relationship, had committed sodomy, which is still against the UCMJ, If there were any criminal offenses or anything like that, it's been much more difficult for them to come back in. But I know officially it's on a case-by-case basis.
It was the reason I left. I couldn't deal with the lies anymore, and going to work and constantly having people think one thing and having to play one game, it wore on me. And it was stressful, not only when I was deployed, but when I came back, just because I didn't think it was fair. It wasn't what I was taught at the Naval Academy. It wasn't what I was taught at the basic school. And I felt that I couldn't lead my Marines in the way that I was taught to lead my Marines, because I was lying to them every day. When I was getting out, it was during the Prop 8 debate. And so I remember distinctly one time I had a gunnery sergeant, female, who to this day I think was a lesbian, but that's beside the point, look at the TV in our office, and she came out with the, God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, and I'm like, wait a minute. I can't sit here and say anything to this woman who's clearly wrong and clearly doesn't have an informed opinion about this. She's repeating what she's heard, throughout the years. But if I say something to her, then that question's going to get turned right back around on me, and that could be the end of my career. And so I sat in silence and I listened to my Marines call people fags. I listened to them talk about gays doing this and doing that. And like Matthew, here I was one of them. And I was effectively silenced as a leader. And I felt that my leadership would be better used on the outside than used on the inside of the military where I didn't have a place. So that's why I made the decision.